Well, it doesn't take a meteorologist to tell that low pressure is firmly in charge of the Western European weather pattern at the moment. Thanks for clicking on to the Monday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. Low pressure being stuck over the British Isles and across the near continent in recent times, all thanks to a very strong wall within the atmosphere, within the river. What we've got is, of course, when you've got air piling in into an area where it can't go anywhere, it deepens, and of course we've seen that with Storm Alex produce a wind gust of 115 mile per hour off the Brittany coast. We also seen some remarkable rainfall because areas of this area of low pressure has been stuck for days over the same area, all because of that area of high pressure that's been essentially blocking any escape route for this area of low pressure. You can see high pressure weaker though to the south, to the west over the North Atlantic, north up into Iceland, and of course the strongest has been to the east over Eastern Europe here. But we've seen as much as 115 millimeters of rain in the last 3 days across the British Isles. We've seen upwards of 500 millimeters of rainfall in the space of just a 24-hour period in France. We've seen over 600 millimeters of rainfall in a 24-hour period in Italy, and we also seen, I believe, the second wettest 24-hour period on record for Switzerland. Folks, is all this storminess and all this wet weather indicating where the trough is going for the winter season? That is certainly something that I am paying attention to, that's for sure. So let's have a quick look today at the CFSV2, the weeklies. So this is the upcoming 7-day period of the model here for the 500 millibar height anomalies, and you can see here basically a bullseye of low pressure centered right over the North Sea and extending into the western half of the eastern half of the UK. Week 2, you can see here that the trough is somewhat weaker, but it's still positioned over France and over the southern half of the UK. Notice here the amount of blocking here over the top and to the east here. That's very interesting indeed here. I believe anyway, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe the hyperactive period that was seen in the tropics in about 2 weeks ago has led to all that transfer of heat northwards into the high latitude region, and I think this is the atmospheric response to all that heat release here, and I think that could have a longer lasting influence towards the winter season as well, and I'll talk more about that in the coming weeks, of course. Week 3, you can see here a area of high pressure over Scandinavia, and then by the time we get out to the week 4 period, so this takes us to between the 25th and the 1st November, you notice here a kind of neutral height field over the UK and over the northern half of Europe here. What's very interesting about all this is the fact that you've got stronger than normal heights always showing up on the model to the west of the UK. So that's indicating a kind of lean towards a negative North Atlantic oscillation. I think that's very interesting indeed overall. So let's have a quick look at the precipitation over the coming weeks here. So this is the anomaly of the CFSV2 weeklies, and you can see here plenty more precipitation to come. British Isles, Scandinavia, down the eastern side of Europe. Notice here we've got a bit of a kind of hole within this precipitation shield over parts of Germany, Poland, and into the northern half of the Alpine region here. We've also got wetter than normal here. Notice the drier than normal here, of course, over the Atlantic. So it very much indicates that we're not seeing as much of an Atlantic influence as opposed to more of a kind of continental influence. I think, folks, that it's very, very possible that this is the pattern that we could be looking at and talking about again once we get into the winter season. Of course, if that's the case, a lot of the precipitation will be in the form of snowfall, hopefully. watch this space. You notice here, as we go towards the period, the 11th to the 18th of October here, the bullseye of precipitation higher than normal is across the alpine region, and I think a lot of that could be in the form of snowfall, in fact. And then as we go out later into the period here, it indicates drier than normal conditions. Wetter than normal across the Atlantic, that would indicate that we may have more of an Atlantic influence returning once again here. But I do think, even with a negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, I do think the negative that we see at the moment will retreat back to a positive once again. And the reason, in a sense, why I think that is because the tropics had shut down for a period of time, but it's now starting to regain momentum, so to speak. So watch this space. Watch the height field over the high latitude region start to change to a more negative with more positive underneath. I think we'll see that taking place later October into the month of November, and then of course with a more active period over the next few weeks across the Atlantic with the tropics. I think that's when we could start to see the pattern that we've got now coming back as we go into the second half of November into the month of December. Also, what's worth noting is the lack of activity in the Pacific. So again, you've got that counterbalance. Lack of activity across the Pacific, hyperactive across the Atlantic. We've not seen that in recent years, of course. We also, in the Arctic, while we've seen the second lowest Arctic sea ice on record, of course the lowest being 2012, we have now seen the highest Antarctic sea ice concentration for September this year than any year between 1979 and 1999. What does that tell you? It tells me, at least, that we're seeing this balancing act by the atmosphere, Earth's climate system, showing that one extreme goes from one side, you get the other at the bottom, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing the reflection between the South Pole and the North Pole, and it's very interesting to see how much Antarctic sea ice we've got versus how little we've got in the Arctic. And I think what we could potentially see is, while we're seeing a record strong polar vortex last year, we could have in the end a record, or not necessarily a record week, but certainly a much weaker polar vortex this year coming up. And there's a lot of things that I think are pointing towards that. So the 7-day period upcoming of the CFSV2, cooler than normal across the UK and across France. Very, very warm across the eastern half of Europe. Again, you get that, of course. One side's cold, the other side's warm. One side's got little Arctic sea ice, the other side's got a tremendous amount of our Antarctic sea ice. So you can see here what I'm talking about. Week 2 period, we've got plenty of below normal extending from the southern half of the UK and Ireland into France, into Spain. The blowtorch continues over the eastern side of the continent, and then once we get towards the second half of October, you notice here that we'll start to see warmer conditions overall. So I think I've spoken long enough this afternoon. Hope you have a great day, and I'll be back in the next few days with more. Bye for now.